The search for missing South Carolina woman Elena Moore has likely ended in tragedy. Doesn't mean we have all the answers, but I want to explain what we seem to know. So, the Lexington, South Carolina Police Department announced that at 2:48 p.m. this afternoon, the body of a woman wearing clothing that fit the description of Moore was found in the area of North Lake Drive and Old Cherokee Road near where she was last seen. Last night, police released newly discovered security footage of Moore in a Publix grocery store parking lot walking in the direction of Old Cherokee Road around 9:17 p.m. after leaving a Planet Fitness on Thursday, June 11th. So that's the night that she disappeared. And that broadened the search today to the area where the body had been discovered. And this discovery comes alongside new...
For words, that's all it took. Standing on a stranger's porch, going through bags that weren't hers. A woman who built her entire identity on being put together looked a neighbor in the eye and said she had no idea what she was doing there. 9 days later, she was dead in the woods. But here's what should chill you. The silence wasn't sudden. For nearly a decade, she had been quietly screaming into the void, in private messages, in late-night posts only a handful of people ever saw, in a single, desperate sentence she whispered to a friend over a meal just weeks before she vanished. She was scared for her life. And then she went quiet in a way that nobody who knew her had ever seen before. Her body, when they finally found it, told investigators almost nothing. No wounds, no bruises, no obvious violence of any kind. Just a 39-year-old woman gone in a stretch of wood 1.5 miles from where anyone last saw her walking, and a cause of death that, even now, remains a locked door. This is a story about a woman who tried to leave, over and over again, for years, and a death that science still cannot explain. Before we go any further, I have to be honest with you. This case involves real disappearance, real trauma, and details that some viewers may find disturbing. If you're sensitive to true crime content involving domestic distress or unexplained death, please take care of yourself watching this. If this is your first time here, welcome to Unsolved Files. Drop a comment and let us know where in the world you're watching from tonight. And if you want to be here the moment the toxicology results in this case finally break, hit subscribe and turn on notifications, because we will be covering it the second it's public. Elena Moore was 39 years old, and by most accounts, she didn't sit still. She worked as a personal trainer at Wolf's Fitness Center, picked up shifts at a local CVS, and bartended around Lexington on top of that. 3 jobs, 3 different circles of people who saw her every week. The people who knew her described the same woman, almost word for word. Outgoing, always smiling. The friend who showed up even on the days she didn't feel like it. Clients say that even when she was having a hard time personally, she still kept her appointments. She still coached. She still laughed with them. In 2013, she started a relationship with a man named Brandon Slice. They were together for over a decade before they got married, choosing February 29th, 2024, a leap day, a date that only comes around once every 4 years, to make it official. From the outside, it looked like a settled life, a career built on 3 jobs and steady relationships, a marriage over a decade in the making. And then, in June of 2026, all of it became the backdrop to a disappearance no one saw coming. 7 days before Elena Moore disappeared, something happened that wouldn't surface publicly until much later. On June 4th, an emergency dispatch call came in describing a woman in her 30s, disoriented, in a residential area of Lexington. The call would later be matched to Moore, though at the time, no name was attached to it. What stands out about that dispatch isn't dramatic language or a frantic caller. It's a single clinical phrase buried in the report. The woman was, in the dispatcher's words, reacting to internal stimuli. That phrase has a specific meaning. It's the kind of language used when someone appears to be responding to something other people can't see or hear, the sort of behavior that can signal a serious psychiatric episode in progress. It isn't a diagnosis. It's an observation, written down by someone trained to notice exactly that kind of thing, in real time, on a call that had nothing to do with a missing person yet, because at that point, nobody was missing. This is the earliest documented sign that something had shifted in Elena Moore's life that week. Not a private message, not a friend's recollection months later. A time-stamped emergency call, on the record, 7 days before her name made headlines. What happened immediately after that call would shape the next 8 days of her life, and ultimately, the final hours before she vanished. But on June 4th, none of that was visible yet. There was only a dispatch report, a description that matched her, and a phrase that, in hindsight, reads like the first page of a story everyone around her was still years away from fully understanding. Following that June 4th call, Elena Moore was admitted to Three Rivers Behavioral Health, a psychiatric facility in West Columbia. She went involuntarily. That detail matters because it shapes everything that happened next. As a voluntary patient, Moore wasn't held under any court order or involuntary commitment. She retained the legal right to leave whenever she chose. She stayed at the facility for roughly a week. Then, on June 11th, just before 2 in the afternoon, she was discharged. The facility arranged transportation for her, a cab, standard procedure for a patient leaving care. But instead of heading home, Moore asked the driver to stop at a CVS on Sunset Boulevard in Lexington. The driver pulled in and waited. She went inside. She didn't come back out. After enough time passed, the driver went in after her, trying to locate his passenger inside the store. He couldn't find her. At some point during that visit to CVS, Elena Moore simply left on foot without telling the driver, without finishing the ride home. That CVS stop is the last confirmed point of contact anyone has for Elena Moore between her discharge and what came next. No one has accounted for where she went or what she did in the hours immediately after walking out of that store. What's documented is this: a woman released from a psychiatric facility just hours earlier, alone, on foot, in the middle of the afternoon, with no clear destination on record. The next confirmed sighting of her wouldn't come until early that evening, at a gym a few miles away. But the gap between the CVS and that sighting is one of the open questions in this case, a window of time investigators have never been able to fully fill in. Hours after walking out of that CVS, Elena Moore resurfaced at 6:38 in the evening. Her membership was used to sign in at a Planet Fitness on Whiteford Way in Lexington, the gym she regularly visited as part of her work as a personal trainer. To anyone watching the front desk that night, it would look completely ordinary, a familiar face, checking in like she had countless times before. But she didn't work out. Surveillance footage shows her inside only briefly. She showered, and then she left, walking out of the gym and away from the building, heading toward a wooded area behind a neighboring Lowe's home improvement store. After that, cameras lost her for 2 hours and 37 minutes. No footage, no confirmed sighting, no record of where she went or what she did during that stretch of time. The second unexplained gap in a single day that already had one. Then, at 9:17 that night, a camera picked her up again, this time at a Publix grocery store parking lot on Old Cherokee Road, roughly half a mile from the gym. She was still wearing the same olive green zip-up hoodie and black athletic pants she'd had on at Planet Fitness, walking in the direction of Old Cherokee Road. No urgency in her pace. No clear destination visible in the footage. That image, time-stamped 9:17 p.m. on June 11th, is the last confirmed sighting of Elena Moore alive. She didn't come home that night. The next morning, June 12th, her husband, Brandon Slice, reported her missing. Lexington Police Department Inspector Missy Silcox would later describe Moore's disappearance in blunt terms, calling it very out of character. For a woman with 3 jobs, a regular gym routine, and a consistent presence in the lives of people around her, simply vanishing without a trace fit nothing about the pattern of her daily life. At least not the version of her daily life that was visible to the people who knew her. What investigators had, at that point, was a timeline with 2 gaps in on the same day: a discharge from a psychiatric facility that morning, a missing cab ride, a gym visit that ended in the direction of a tree line, and then nothing. No phone activity, no vehicle, just a woman walking into a parking lot at 9:17 at night, and then disappearing entirely from a record. For the first few days after Elena Moore was reported missing, investigators worked with what little they had: a last known direction of travel, a timestamp, no phone signal, no vehicle, and a woman who had walked toward a tree line and never reappeared. On June 15th, for days after she vanished, the Lexington Police Department conducted a detailed, large-scale search of the wooded areas behind the gym and the neighboring Lowe's. Officers deployed a drone over the area and physically combed the terrain on foot. It wasn't framed as a recovery operation. At that stage, it was described as an effort to rule out one possible location, not confirm the worst one. The search turned up nothing. No sign of Moore. No evidence she had been there at all. With the trail going cold, police leaned on the public. Detective Santoro was named as the point of contact for tips, and Lexington police partnered with Midland's Crime Stoppers, offering a $1,500 reward for information leading to Moore's whereabouts. Her case, by this point, had moved well past local news. National outlets had picked up the story, and that wider attention was about to matter more than anyone expected. If you're invested in how this case gets resolved, this is the point where it's worth subscribing, because what happens next is the difference between a missing persons case and a death investigation, and we'll be covering every update the moment it's confirmed. On June 17th at 1:30 in the afternoon, a tip came in from someone in the community, placing Moore near the intersection of North Lake Drive and Old Cherokee Road. Officers moved fast. By 2:48 that same afternoon, search teams had located a body in the area. Lexington Police Chief Terrence Green addressed reporters shortly after, crediting the discovery directly to the public attention the case had received. He thanked the media specifically, noting that sustained coverage was what generated the tip that ended the search. The clothing on the body matched what Moore had last been seen wearing. With that, the Lexington Police Department formally requested the South Carolina Law Enforcement Division take over what was now classified as an active death investigation. 2 days later, on June 19th, the Lexington County Coroner's Office made it official. The body that had been found was confirmed to be Elena Catherine Moore. With Elena more formally identified, the next step belonged to the medical examiners. On June 20th, an autopsy was performed at the Medical University of South Carolina in Charleston, a facility equipped to handle the kind of forensic examination this case demanded. 2 days later, on June 22nd, Lexington County Coroner Margaret Fisher released the preliminary findings, and they raised more questions than they answered. The examination found no evidence of traumatic injury of any kind. No bruising, no lacerations, no gunshot wounds, no stab wounds, no blunt force trauma, no strangulation, no external injuries whatsoever. To understand why that finding matters so much, it helps to understand what an autopsy is actually built to do first. In most death investigations, especially ones involving sudden or unexplained deaths, the external examination is the fastest way to identify an obvious cause. A wound, a mark, a sign of physical force. When a medical examiner rules all of that out, it doesn't mean the death wasn't caused by something. It means the cause isn't visible on the surface, and the answer has to come from somewhere else. That's exactly where this case stood after June 22nd. Coroner Fisher's office stated plainly that the cause of death remained pending, and that 3 specific areas of further evaluation were still required. The first is toxicology testing, a process that screens blood and tissue samples for the presence of drugs, medications, or other substances that could explain a death with no external trauma. The second is histological studies, meaning microscopic examination of tissue samples under a lab setting, a method used to detect internal damage or disease that isn't visible to the naked eye during a standard autopsy. The third is a full review of Moore's medical history, cross-referencing any pre-existing conditions, prescriptions, or treatment records, including, notably, her recent stay at a psychiatric facility just days before she disappeared. Each of those 3 processes can take time, sometimes weeks, occasionally longer, depending on lab capacity and the complexity of what investigators are looking for. Given the unresolved nature of her death, the South Carolina Law Enforcement Division formally took over the investigation in full, working alongside the coroner's office as the toxicology and tissue analysis moved forward. Coroner Fisher's office was direct about what would happen next. Nothing. No further public statements. No additional details. Until all 3 components were complete and a forensic pathologist had made an official determination of both the cause and the manner of Elena Moore's death. As of now, that ruling has not been released. What we're left with is a documented timeline of a discharge from psychiatric care, 2 unexplained gaps in her final day, and a body that, physically, shows no sign of how she died. The autopsy answered one question by eliminating obvious possibilities. It left the central question of this entire case exactly where it started. To understand the woman behind this case, the investigation now has to step back, away from June of 2026, and go back nearly a decade, to a message most people didn't know existed until after she died. In 2017, a close friend named Ashton Jeffcoat shared a screenshot with reporters, a Facebook Messenger conversation Moore had sent her that year. In it, Moore wrote about possibly ending her relationship with Brandon Slice and looking for a roommate, language suggesting she was actively considering leaving. At that point, the two had been together around 4 years. They wouldn't marry for another 7. That single message, on its own, might be unremarkable. People reconsider relationships all the time, and most of those conversations never resurface publicly. What makes this one different is what friends say came after it. Not a breakup and not a one-time doubt, but a pattern that repeated for years. A friend named Lauren Beasley described it as a cycle. Moore would talk about wanting to move out, wanted to end things, and then she wouldn't. According to Beasley, Moore would say she didn't know what to do, that she loved him, and then things would settle for a while, before the same uncertainty resurfaced later. In Beasley's own words, it was definitely a cycle. Another close friend, Sandra Rochelle Campbell, corroborated that account in her own way, saying Moore had tried to leave the relationship more than once over the years, going back well before the marriage. And yet, through all of it, the relationship continued. Moore and Slice didn't separate. They stayed together for over a decade, and on February 29th, 2024, a leap day, they got married. That contrast is worth sitting with plainly, without overstating it. A private message from 2017 questioning the relationship, a public wedding 7 years later. Two true things that existed at the same time, in the same relationship, without one canceling out the other. It's also worth being precise about what this pattern does and doesn't tell us. A long history of ambivalence about a relationship is not evidence of how that relationship ended, and it's not evidence of how Elena Moore died. It tells us she carried unresolved feelings about her marriage for years. It does not, on its own, explain anything about June of 2026. In the months leading up to her disappearance, Elena Moore was writing again, this time on a second Instagram account, separate from the public one her clients and followers knew. Reporting from TMZ, which reviewed the post, described the tone as raw, touching on emotional exhaustion and pain, the kind of writing people keep for an audience of almost no one. Mendy Miller, a friend of more than 2 decades, told reporters Moore had been working on cutting toxic people out of her life. Miller was careful to say this was general, not about one specific person, a broader effort to clear out negativity rather than a pointed exit from a single relationship. Then came May 31st. Moore met a group of friends and clients for brunch, including Sandra Rochelle Campbell. By Campbell's account, something was off from the start. Moore wasn't calm. She kept looking around, glancing toward the window repeatedly, behavior Campbell described as completely unlike the woman she knew. At some point, Moore pulled Campbell aside privately and told her 5 words. She was scared for her life. She didn't explain why. The two agreed to talk more later. A call came in from Moore on June 4th. Campbell missed it and never got the chance to call her back. That date matters. June 4th is the same day emergency dispatchers were called to a disoriented woman reacting to internal stimuli, the episode that led to Moore's hospitalization. 2 events, the same day, from 2 completely different sources, neither one explaining the other. This is where the case splits into 2 competing readings, both held by credible, on-record voices. Campbell has been direct about where she stands. She said publicly that she believes it was foul play and that Moore had been dealing with serious issues in her marriage, including an attempt to separate from her husband. Former FBI agent Jennifer Coffin Daffer offered a more measured framework, noting publicly that a psychiatric crisis and serious relationship problems aren't mutually exclusive. A person can be navigating both a mental health episode and real fear inside a marriage at the same time, and neither one disprove the other. Private investigator Henry Dukes, who has worked the case independently, has pushed back on parts of Campbell's broader characterization without disputing the documented facts of the hospitalization or the brunch conversation themselves. What's left, then, is not a single theory, but two threads running in parallel. A documented psychiatric episode investigators can point to directly, and a friend's first-hand account of fear inside a marriage that no official report has confirmed or ruled out. Both are part of the record. Neither one, on its own, answers the only question that matters. A week before she disappeared, a Ring doorbell camera in a residential neighborhood captured footage of Elena Moore that looked nothing like the woman her clients and friends described. A delivery driver had dropped off a food order in an apartment belonging to a man named John Moore, no relation to Elena. Moore picked up the order herself. When John Moore opened his door to retrieve it, she didn't hand it over and walk away. She tried to follow him inside. About an hour later, a neighbor named Sarah Burleson spotted her again, this time going through packages outside a different apartment that weren't hers. Burleson asked her directly what she was doing. Moore's answer was 4 words. She had no idea. Given everything documented around that same window of time, this footage doesn't read as an isolated mystery. It lines up with the emergency dispatch call from days earlier and the psychiatric episode that followed it. Seen in that context, a woman who appeared disoriented on a stranger's porch fits a pattern investigators had already started piecing together, not a new and separate unknown. Burleson later said the moment stayed with her, and that she'd wondered since whether Moore was in that same state of confusion the night she vanished. On a separate track of the investigation, private investigator Henry Dukes addressed the husband's conduct throughout the search, stating on record that Brandon Slice had been proactive in looking for his wife and had shown no red flags in their conversations. Dukes described him, in his own assessment, as someone actively trying to help, not someone behaving like a person with something to hide. There's one more piece of Brandon Slice's history that became public as this case developed, and it deserves to be handled carefully because it's easy to misread. Reporting from FITS News revealed that Slice once held a law enforcement certification and that he lost it following an internal affairs investigation. According to that reporting, the probe referenced MDMA and an unnamed girlfriend, details that point to a professional conduct issue from his past, separate from his marriage to Elena Moore and separate from anything connected to her death. It's important to be precise about what this is and isn't. It's a documented matter of public record, the kind of thing that shows up in personnel files and internal affairs reports. It is not evidence of any involvement in his wife's disappearance or death. Those are 2 entirely different categories of fact, and collapsing them into one would be exactly the kind of unfounded leap this investigation has avoided at every other turn. What hasn't changed, even with this new detail in the public record, is a position law enforcement has held from the beginning. Lexington police have stated clearly and repeatedly that Brandon Slice is not considered a person of interest in Elena Moore's death. He's the one who reported her missing. He's cooperated with investigators throughout the search and the death investigation that followed. Nothing in the case file, as far as the public record shows, contradicts that. So this detail sits where it belongs, as context about who Brandon Slice is, drawn from his own past, not as a thread connected to what happened to his wife. The 2 stories exist side by side. They are not the same story. So where does this case actually stand today? No one has been charged with a crime. Brandon Slice remains, by Lexington Police's own account, not a person of interest, a position that has not changed since the day he reported his wife missing. The cause and manner of Elena Moore's death remain officially pending, awaiting toxicology results, tissue analysis, and a complete review of her medical history, including the psychiatric care she received just days before she vanished. What we're left with is a timeline built almost entirely of documented fact. An emergency call on June 4th, a voluntary hospitalization that followed it, a discharge on June 11th, a missing cab ride, and 2 unexplained gaps in the hours before her last confirmed sighting at 9:17 that night. A search that found nothing for 6 days, until a single tip succeeded where a large-scale operation hadn't. An autopsy that ruled out every obvious form of trauma and answered nothing else. Go back to where the story started. A woman on a stranger's porch, unable to explain what she was doing there. At the time, that moment looked like an isolated mystery. It isn't. It's one data point inside a much longer, better documented sequence, a psychiatric episode, a hospital stay, a discharge, and then silence. The pieces connect. What they add up to still doesn't. That's the responsible place to leave this, at least for now. There's a real difference between what's been confirmed and what's been theorized, between Campbell's belief that foul play was involved and the documented medical record investigators have in hand. Both exist. Neither one has been proven, and a case like this deserves better than picking the more dramatic version and calling it the truth. The answer, when it comes, will come from a lab, not from speculation, a toxicology report, tissue studies, and a forensic pathologist's final word on what actually happened to Elena Catherine Moore. When that ruling is made public, we'll have it covered in full, with the complete context behind it, before most coverage has even finished reading the press release. If you want to be here for that moment instead of finding out secondhand, subscribe now, because this is far from over. Thank you for watching. We'll see you in the next one.